Welcome. They call me Tolumbay, and I will be your guide to the history of Cumans. Now let me present you second part of the story about their interaction with the lands of the Kievan Rus, starting in the year 1095 and focused on one of the most infamous warriors among them, Khan Bonyak. Our story begins while Bonyak, allied with another Khan Tugor Khan, took out for an adventure for the Byzantine throne under the banner of the so-called Pseudo-Diogenes, which I mentioned in an earlier episode. While they were out, two other notable Polovtsy named Hitler and Kitan approached Vladimir Monomakh in Pereaslaw, offering peace after continuous small-scale military clashes. Vladimir was open for negotiations and gave his son Sviatoslav as a hostage to Kitan, who set up a camp outside of the city, while Hitler remained as his guest. However, there was a man that didn't like peace to be an option. Certain Slavyata, agent of Grand Prince Sviatopolk, together with like-minded men persuaded cautious Vladimir to kill the Cuman emissaries, arguing that it is not a sin to break the word given to them, since the Polovtsy are never keeping their part of the deal either. Special agent Slavyata then took a small escort and some August Turks, and under the cover of night rescued Sviatoslav from Kitan's camp and slaughtered his bodyguards. Hitler, unaware what is happening outside of the walls, spent his night in one of the palaces. In the morning, they were invited to get dressed in one of the rooms that was warmed up for them and joined the prince for breakfast. Oblivious Hitler entered the room with few of his men and found out that the doors got locked up from the outside. Meanwhile, a man named Olbek climbed up on the roof and made a hole through which he shot Hitler in the heart. Rest of his men were overwhelmed and slaughtered too. Even the chronicler, usually not fan of the pagan Polovtsy, commented about the immorality of this action that happened on Sunday, February the 24th. After the deed was done, Vladimir, joined by Sviatopolk, quickly moved to attack the remains of Hitler's horde. To be certain of victory, princes asked Oleg of Chernihiv to join them in this expedition. As I mentioned before, Oleg was cooperating with the Cumans on several occasions, and on top of that, he hosted at his court Hitler's son. So was his participation on such an unprovoked strike quite improbable. Even though he reluctantly agreed to join them, he came intentionally too late to participate. Vladimir and Sviatopolk seized the Cumans' encampment beyond the border village of Goltau and brought home numerous cattle, horses, camels and slaves. After that, eyes of Sviatoslav and Vladimir turned to Oleg. Angry princes sent him a message in which they scolded their cousin for not aiding them and demanded to either hand over Hitler's son or to straight up kill him. Oleg, being a stubborn black sheep of the family, didn't give a damn about this request, and the void between him and his cousins grew even wider. Revenge of the Cumans was just a matter of time. Even though we cannot be sure if it was direct response for Hitler's and Kitan's murder, a group of Polovtsy warriors sieged Yuriev in the Kyiv principality the same year. When the town was about to fall, Sviatopolk was able to pacify them, as the chronicler put it, and they left beyond the river Ros. Due to this wording, it is possible to assume that they were not defeated by force, but perhaps simply paid off. Inhabitants of Yuriev left, and the deserted town was burned down by the Cumans, probably in an attempt to weaken the line of fortifications on the borders, leaving the weak spot to enter the Principality of Kyiv as they please. Next year, in 1096, Vladimir and Sviatopolk made one more attempt to create a coalition of princes against Cumans and invited Oleg to come and join them. Oleg refused, so Vladimir and Sviatopolk led armies to subdue him. While three princes fought miles north of Chernihiv, the people of Kyiv heard strange howls in the night. It was the famed Bonyak and his warriors, destroying the suburbs and burning down the prince's palace at Berestovo. At the same time, another Cuman named Kuria ravaged the environs of Pereyaslaw and burned down the town of Ustye on 24th day of May. This two-pronged attack was certainly a revenge for Hitler and Kitan, as it hit the possessions of both the princes involved in their murder. But it is unsure if the Polovtsy knew that both principalities are vacant of strong military forces sent to battle Oleg. One may only assume that given his cordial relations with the Cumans, this timing was not merely accidental. Both Cuman forces pulled out after just a brief pillaging, but their disappearance was just a trick. The same month, Tugor Khan, veteran of Balkan battles and father-in-law of Grand Prince Sviatopolk, came and sieged Pereaslaw. It is very possible that Kuria and Bonyak served only as a scouting party, checking out the defenses and maybe making sure that the information about the princely armies marching north weren't just a trap. Tugor-Khan set up a blockade around the fortified town with intent to wait up until the hungry and thirsty defenders surrender, as usual. When the news reached Vladimir and Sviatopolk, they hurried up to relieve the inhabitants of the important town, passing south on the right bank of Dnieper. Rus forces didn't attempt to cross the river in the vicinity of the enemy, but continued more downstream, towards the fort at Zarup, cutting the Polovtzian forces from the south unnoticed. When approaching Tugor-Khan and his troops, Vladimir's men didn't even regroup and reconcile, just hastily attacked. Surprisingly, these tactics worked, and the Cumans turned to flee and were caught up and destroyed. Losses were huge, even if not in number, then for sure in importance, as Tugor-Khan himself fell on the battlefield. When his body was found, Sviatopolk ordered his father-in-law to be buried close to Berestovo, the same settlement hit by Bonyak short time before. This happened 19th day of June. It is not clear why the Cumans didn't put up proper fight, but the explanation may lie in what happened the next day, as the Kievans heard the wolf howls for the second time. Indeed, Bonyak and his army pushed on the Grand Prince's city, and not able to get through the walls, they pillaged and burned the monasteries not protected by the fortification. What is interesting, the author of this passage of the Primary Chronicle was an eyewitness to this event, as he switches from the more general descriptory way of writing to first-person narrative. Thus we know in detail that after the Polovtsy announced their presence in front of the Pecheneg monastery, the monks tried to hide, but were caught in a thorough cell-by-cell sweep and killed. Cumans got inside the church by setting the doors on fire. As they were taking anything of value and destroying the rest, they mocked the Christian God to come up and protect his servants. After that, they burned some more buildings around the city and assumably left. There is a question whether this raid was Bonyak's response to the defeat and death of his close ally Tugor-Khan, which happened just the previous day, or was planned in advance. The second option may be the reason why Tugor-Khan was unable to resist Rus forces by Pereaslaw. The army split, and the bigger part of the troops went to Kyiv, as they would expect Vladimir and Sviatoslav first come to relieve the capital. Surprising route that the Rus took allowed them to circumvent the wall Bonyak's horde and crush Tugor-Khan. However, the Cumans weren't as united as it may seem from these joint expeditions. Bonyak and Tugor-Khan were most probably each heads of their own tribes, or hordes, but they were not the only ones. There are a lot of disputes about the localization of their domains and many other that I will keep for separate episode. One thing important here is that from the direction of the raids it seems that Bonyak had his center of operations roughly west from the Dnieper river and Tugor-Khan east. But apart from these two, other Khans or even lesser positioned bases were doing their own diplomatic treaties and alliances, similar to Hitler and Khitan. For example, later the same year of Tugor-Khan's death, a force of Polovtsians were sent by Monomakh himself under the command of certain Kunui to help Vladimir's son Mstislav fight with Oleg. What may be interesting is that Kunui was ordered to lead Mstislav's foot soldiers and not the cavalry, as would be expected from the nomadic horsemen. Fights between the Rus princes continued also during the next year, 1097, despite the efforts to conclude some kind of overall alliance. In this time, new protagonist is coming up on the stage. David Sviatoslavich, brother of Oleg and late Roman. Unlike his brothers, he did not search for shelter in Tmutarakan, but in Murom, easternmost town of the Rus. While Oleg was pushed for some time from Chernihiv the previous year, he was joined by his brother in fight with Vladimir Monomakh's sons. His attention shifted soon from east to west, as he allied himself with Volodar Rostislavich of Galicia. Getting the shorter side of the stick, David was eventually forced to leave Rus for Poland, where he was searching for potential allies. Not getting much of an actual help, he then moved for the traditional allies of the sons of Sviatoslav, the Cumans. He met with no one else but Bonyak, and together they marched to cut off Grand Prince's ally coming from the west, Koloman, king of Hungary, and his retinue. They were about to clash by the town of Przemysl in the territory of today's southeastern Poland. Before the battle, the chronicler describes a story that gave Bonyak the aura of a wild animal he bears in the written sources that transformed into the animalistic adversary in folklore of western Ukraine. At midnight, Bonyak rode away from the army, and when he was alone, started to howl like a wolf. And the beasts answered, first one, then the chorus of howls, telling Bonyak that the next day his forces will be victorious. In the morning, the armies began to prepare for the clash. Author of the Primary Chronicle gives surprisingly believable number for David's side and tremendously unbelievable for the Hungarian. David should have commanded 100 men, Bonyak 300, and King Koloman 100,000. The strategy is described in detail, making the source of this description most probably someone close to David present at the battle itself. Bonyak divided the men traditionally into 3 columns, sending his lieutenant Altunopa with 50 horse archers as a vanguard. They were about to perform an oldest tactics in the book of nomadic warfare, feigned retreat. Altunopa's men shoot a volley of arrows and retreated, luring part of the Hungarian army to a trap, getting caught by Bonyak from the rear and slaughtered in pincer move. After that came the second oldest trick up the nomad sleeve, the so-called Cantabrian Circle. Polovtsy drove the Hungarians as falcon drives magpies, successfully routing them. Many drowned during their escape in the rivers of Viagra and San. Polovtsy then pursued them for 2 days, killing many more. Hungarian chronicles from the 14th century recall this battle as a disaster, remembering even probably Bonyak's name, mismatched as Manok, similar to Bonyak used in Byzantine records. David continued the intestine fights with help of Bonyak, taking a few cities, but the strife ended only by the truce between the princes and official recognition of David as a ruler of the Rogobush. Turn of the centuries brought a short-time peace between Rus and the Cumans. According to the chronicler, in 1109, without known reason, all the leaders of Polovtsy sent envoys to the Rus princes asking to stop the enmity. 2 parties met 15 September at Sakov on the left bank of Dnieper and formally made peace, followed by the exchange of noble hostages. The situation didn't last for long though. Apparently, some clashes in the border zones connected with nomad need of pillage due to their economic system of the steppe still continued. 2 years later, in spring 1103, princes of Rus gathered to plan a major strike deep into the Polovtzian fields. Of course, except Oleg, who decided to skip this adventure officially due to his illness and unofficially most probably because his proximity to the Cumans. Vladimir's request to conduct the attack in the time when the men are supposed to plow the fields instead of fighting was also questioned by the rest of his cousins. Monomakh replied that only preemptive strike will prevent the Polovtsian raids on such plowing men. This time of the year wasn't surely chosen mere by a whim. Even though the Cumans were wintering in the more temperate climate in the south, the season surely left a mark on their horses and livestock and therefore their ability to resist. So the Rus forces advanced deep into the steppe, to the nomad winter camps at river Sutin, which is most probably today's Molochnaya that flows into the Sea of Azov. Cuman base were already expecting them, gathering forces and starting to make up a plan. According to the chronicler, one of the older chiefs named Urusoba suggested to make peace and avoid bloodshed, but the younger ones disagreed. When the battle started, Polovtsy sent Altunopa, hero of the battle with Hungarians, to perform the same maneuver. But unlike the previous time at Przemysl, his attack was a disaster and Altunopa perished together with all of his men. Rus forces pushed and prevailed, routing the Cumans and cutting them down on 4th day of April. 20 Bays were slain during this attack, among them Urusoba, Kchi, Arslanopa, Kitanopa, Cuman, Asup, Kurtek, Chenegrepa, Surbar. One of them, Belgius, was taken captive, and even his offers of gold and silver, horses and cattle didn't help. Vladimir, pointing out that he was an oath-breaker, ordered him to be cut to pieces. Rus, taking the rich spoils and capturing Pechenegs and Torks, who were in the Cuman servitude, returned home. Absence of Bonyak in this fight is a mystery. Despite sending Altunopa to help his kinsmen, the whereabouts of the old werewolf during this battle are unknown. Archaeological excavations on the banks of river Molochnaya brought up extremely well-preserved grave of a Cuman warrior that may be, with some imagination, belonging to one of the killed Khans. The man, buried in a Bronze Age kurgan, was packed for afterlife not only by his saddled horse, weapons and household utensils, but the whole cart to carry his yurt under the eternal heaven. Not to mention, famous Chingul kurgan, that happens to be dated a bit later than our story, was also found in the close vicinity of the Molochnaya river. By the strike of Vladimir and Sviatoslav, Polovtsy were successfully subdued for some time. Only after 3 years, in 1106, they were able to gather some forces and attack Zarechesk in the western Kievan region, but were repelled. The direction of this attack and the mentions in Vladimir's testament may point out that they were sent or even led by Bonyak. Next year, in 1107, he stuck out his mangy head again on the left bank of Dnieper. First reconnaissance mission in May, headed only by him, aimed at the suburbs of Pereaslav and brought spoils mostly in horses. Strengthened by the small victory, later the same year, Bonyak, together with old Shahrukh, probably some kind of Tugor-Khan's successor in the steppes east of Dnieper, attacked Lubny, also in the Pereaslaw principality. Sviatopolk and Vladimir, with their numerous cousins, marched against them to relieve the town siege. They crossed Sula river and directly struck the Cumans, successfully routing them and pursuing them as far as Horol stream to the east. Among the fallen Polovtsy was Bonyak's brother Tas. Shahrukh barely escaped with his life, and Khan Sugar with his brother became captives. Vladimir celebrated another victory over his nemesis. Bonyak's time, however, didn't come to an end so fast, even though his strength deteriorated. Last attack he made was repelled at the river Vir by Vladimir Monomakh, but it is not exactly sure when this happened. Tale of bygone years records unnamed Cumans attacking this area after the death of Grand Prince Sviatopolk in 1116 or 1117. From testament of Vladimir Monomakh, we know that once he defeated Bonyak on this river, but without the dating. In 1129, after the death of Vladimir, his son intended to attack Cumans in his father's picture. Later compiled chronicle speaks of Prince of Polotsk that denied to follow him against Bonyak, but we cannot be sure if this was not misunderstanding of the compiler's source. There is even later mention of Bonyak's name in 1167, but is probably a mistake of a chronicler, because it would make him lead an army at least in his late 90s, which seems very improbable. If he wasn't really a sorcerer, of course. Nevertheless, as mentioned before, Bonyak was immortalized not only in history, but in folk legends and fairy tales. His sons also remembered his fame, wanting to put their saber in the Golden Gate of Kyiv as he did. Even though we don't know exactly when Bonyak's raids on the mortal steppe ended, this episode certainly does now. Next time, more about Vladimir Monomach's attacks and slow decline of the Polovtzian power. So, when you hear the horse's hooves, you'll know who is coming. Thank you for watching.